Today marks the end of New Black Media Appreciation Month, and in my case, it's very fortuitous that it falls on a Sunday. Sunday is when my weekly schedule begins, so I feel it's only fitting that the end of this annual celebration/commemoration takes place when I'm starting my work. It further reinforces why doing this matters, but it also helps all of us to remember that your New Black Media is exactly that. Yours. So, why do this? Why does it even matter that you listen to the new voices of Black media? It's important because human beings are creatures of habit. We are what we do. If you lay bricks, that makes you a bricklayer. If you read books and magazines daily or near daily, that makes you a reader. If you make food all day, that makes you a cook. If you smoke weed all day, that makes you a pothead. And if you listen to the new voices of Black media, that makes you smart. That's what listening to the new voices of Black media says about you. But what does it say about those of us who are behind the microphone? To be sure, it's a lot of work to select, write copy for, prepare, edit, and post these daily briefings for you. That's not a complaint, it's just a statement of fact. It's a labor of love. But make no mistake, it's still labor. The reason that I switched from doing 2 videos a week to doing 6 a week was because there was a part of me that desperately wanted to make sure that I said everything I want to say. That, of course, required that I have to greatly increase my output. I have many motivations for doing so, but one of the main ones, not to be morbid, is that none of us are promised to see tomorrow. For example, Tupac Shakur died early, but after the first attempt on his life, he realized how brief life was, so he made it a point to say as much as he could. He managed to say more by age 25 than most men say in a lifetime. He was aware of the danger that his life was in, and he wanted to make sure that he had his say before he died. And that's why we have no respect for bootlicks, be they on the left or the right, or anywhere in between. Life is short, and if God forbid any of us should die tomorrow, in that instant where your life flashes before your eyes, what I don't want my final thought to be was that I spent my life kissing as much behind as possible. That's not a life worth living. We occasionally have some trolls who try to pretend ignorance to the Black media's message. You can easily spot them because they'll start off saying something like, "You new Black media folks never give any solutions." That's the go-to talking point from losers, lurkers, and do-nothing spectators, many of whom come from these other now obsolete communities that the new Black media put out of business. I'm talking about the Kundalini pseudo-spiritual mumbo-jumbo, who's beefing with who, all the other assorted nitwits, misfits, and good-for-nothings who we made irrelevant. A number of them tried to reinvent themselves, tried to sound like us, and they failed because what we do requires 2 things they'll never have: intelligence and integrity. So realizing that they could never be able to co-opt our message, they instead sit on the sidelines griping, because that's what irrelevant people do. But there's also another contingent we have to fight against. The Black folks who are determined to make excuses so that they don't have to take responsibility for the work they know they need to do. Everyone should and must make tangible contributions to the cause, and everyone already knows what they can do. It's just that when people are faced with that moment of truth, the one that requires them to put in effort and time and sacrifice, that's when they begin looking for a way out. As the old saying goes, when people ask for advice, it's usually because they already know the answer, but wish that they didn't. So when people talk about wanting us to give them solutions, that's like a man in the desert dying of thirst, and when he's pointed towards a distant oasis, he complains that you're not giving him a solution. Every Black person knows what the solutions are. We talk about them frequently. But, like a man in the desert who refuses to walk toward the oasis, they realize they'll have to move their lazy behinds toward that goal, and that no one's going to do it for them. As the new voices of Black media, our community is reciprocal. The responsibility for those of us behind the microphone is the same as the responsibility of those of you in front of the speakers. Advocates without a cause have no reason to exist. But a people who do not protect their advocates are a people who will have no advocates. One person, no matter how dedicated, no matter how able, no matter how persistent, cannot do it alone. If you have just one person out there by themselves, you don't call that person an advocate, you call them a target. This is what history has taught us. That's the lesson of the civil rights movement. When you challenge organized power will push back, and they will look to see how many people they're up against. Organized power expects an organized resistance. And if they don't see that organized resistance, then if you're lucky, they'll ignore whomever is causing them problems. But if you're not so lucky, they'll make an example out of you. See, during the civil rights era, you had a lot of black folks who were trying to hitch their wagon to Dr. King or Malcolm X's star, as if basically you become the cheerleading squad for these guys and that's enough. And while I don't think that any of the people who were basically waiting to be led by these men had any sort of malice in their hearts, the problem is that was a strategy, such as it was, that was damned to fail from the very beginning. Following a man, following a leader, at best the only thing you're going to have is a cult of personality, and we need to be honest about that. If you intend to have a movement that's going to sustain you for hundreds of years, you don't rely on a man, you rely on a message. You don't go following a person, you follow a set of principles. A man should not be the leader, the code must be the leader. But you have to have some sort of outlet or medium that's going to articulate that code and to let people know when they're off code. And that's where new black media comes in. That's the purpose that a media serves. You know, there's a reason that they call television shows and radio shows programming, because that's what it is. I am proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish together. I am proud of how I was able to help educate my people exactly how these bootlicks operate. For example, when Simone Sanders and Karine Stank-Pierre were carrying water for Biden during his campaign, I helped educate you about how these people that you see on these campaigns are all actually trying to get jobs in the White House, assuming that their guy wins office. So when Simone Sanders lied and claimed that it was the states who were locking up all the black people and it had nothing to do with Biden's 94 crime bill, I was able to show you where it was a lie, but also to help you understand that as far as she was concerned, she was going to the White House. And she would parlay that into a book deal or two, but ultimately into a job on a white cable news network. Which of course is exactly what she did. She lied through her horse-sized teeth about the damage Biden did to our community. No shred of honesty or even basic decency when she did it. And why was she willing to tell so many lies for so long? All so she could get a job. These bootlicks don't give a rip about the black community. They will help some white supremacists like Biden lock us up by the hundreds of thousands and then afterwards swear that he had nothing to do with it. And then they'll work for that same white supremacist and then afterwards use that to enhance their resume. See, for the bootlick, it's all about themselves. They have no sense of community. Selling us out, that's not some unfortunate, unintended consequence for the bootlick. For these bootlicks, selling us out is the entire plan. They intend to make their bones and give themselves a cushy future over our dead bodies. Well, you don't need a media that does that. There's no cure for stupid, and there's no treatment for cowardice. There's some people who were simply born to crawl on their bellies and bow and scrape. Well, I'm not one of them, and I know you're not either. That's why we do this, and I do mean we. People like myself may be behind the microphone, but you're the ones in front of it. You are the force multiplier. You're the ones whose eyeballs and whose minds white power has been fighting to control, because you're the ones who are the only threat to white supremacy. I suggest you take a bow. You should be proud, not just of your effort and your work, but the unique place that you occupy in history. We adore and revere our grandmaster teachers, but of course there's usually one who we have a special place in our hearts for, and that's fine. We're all individuals. Obviously, we love all of our grandmaster teachers. We celebrate them. We revere them. But of course, each of us has a special place in our heart for a particular one. In my case, it's Dr. John Henrik Clarke. For you, it's probably somebody else. But what's true for the individual is also true for the group. I don't know who your favorite new black media figure is, but whomever it is, I'm sure they'll appreciate you dropping a comment and consistently giving a like. That's part of the reciprocal relationship. At the end of every video, I say black empowerment only exists because of you, and that's not just a slogan, it's a fact. Racism is a group sport, but so is black empowerment. Occasionally, we'll see some black folks who try to cop out behind, but what if there's nobody else within a 5-foot radius for me to build with? Family, when I started posting videos 15 years ago, there was nobody doing what I was doing, or so I thought. I started off doing videos about the real history of ancient Kemet. Why did I stop making those videos? Because too many black people wanted to debate history as opposed to actually learn from it. It reminds me of a story that Dr. John Henrik Clarke told once about a young man who came to one of his lectures, and while Dr. Clarke was talking about our current condition, this young man instead wanted to talk, or rather argue, about ancient Kemet. And he kept going on and on about the pyramids and whether we have the ability to build the pyramids today. Finally, Dr. Clarke got exhausted with this person and said, "Do we need the pyramids now?" Too many black people look at history as a way to escape the unpleasant reality of the present. The past can do a lot of things for us. We can learn from it. We can be inspired by it. But the one thing we cannot do is to live in it. The white supremacists are trying to do that now. That's why so many of the TV shows and movies and books that you see are about the past, back when they had complete and total control. But most of all, they didn't have to see a black person for 1,000 miles. Certainly no black people in a position to challenge them. And as the white majority continues to become a minority, you're going to see more efforts to take refuge in that past. We can't do that. Every black person within the sound of my voice is a one-man or one-woman cell of black empowerment. Before you start asking, where is this army of on-code people I can build with, first make sure you're on code. The people who are asking what other black folks are doing are usually the ones who want an excuse for why they shouldn't have to do what they know they're supposed to do. The doers don't make excuses. They don't look around to see what's everyone else doing. Black empowerment begins with you. When people see you living by the principles of black empowerment, a black person who lives by a code, they will be drawn to that because we have all these bootlicks, hood rats, dusty dudes, and directionless people running around. Our people are far more willing to listen to someone who clearly has done the work of empowering themselves. There's a lot of bootlicks and suck-ups who we don't care about. But this isn't about them. There's a lot of black people who don't see a living example of black discipline in front of them. I'm not saying we need to be on a crusade to recruit people. B1 is not a rescue mission. But it is to say that when people see a group who has their act together, even a single individual who does, they respect that. The military understands that principle. That's why they stress how important it is that members of the military represent the services in a specific particular way. I would imagine the reason you listen to me is because I've shown time and time and time again for so long that I know what I'm talking about. That didn't happen overnight. I've been immersed in this since I was in my early teens. It took time for me to learn how to sharpen my delivery and how to compile my thoughts into a coherent and compelling message. What I didn't do was to sit around asking where everyone else was. I instead gathered my own resources and set about doing the work. And in short order, it became apparent that I wasn't alone at all. There were other black people out here who saw the same problems I did and understood what needed to be done, what needed to be said. See, a large part of the problem has been that we've been isolated from one another. This is why the white media's complete and thorough control of all media has been so devastating. When you never get to hear the truth, when you never get to see anyone challenging things that you know full well to be false, then it confuses you by making you think that you must be some sort of kook. You must have some sort of fringe opinion. There must be something wrong with you. And ultimately, it demoralizes you. Because even if you don't abandon your principles, you will give in to the lie that you must be the only one who thinks this way, or that you're the only one who would be willing to take a stand for this particular principle. So what a lot of folks do is they just don't. That's what the white media wants you to think, because they're not in the business of entertainment or news. They're in the business of mind control. Well, the black media is in the business of empowerment. That's why I encourage you all to support the work that brothers like Jason and Tariq are doing. When they release their documentaries, they could just keep it to an online-only release, but they don't. They begin their rollouts by having a theatrical release. They don't do it as some sort of vanity project. They do it so that you who listen to this message have the ability to see that you're in a room full of hundreds of people who understand the same things you understand, who believe the same things you believe. You're in a room surrounded by hundreds of like-minded people. People have to go there in person in order to see these things. And you notice when they do, these things sell out the venues, multiple venues, in fact. And then these brothers also do live gatherings and rallies. Brother Tariq has a foundational Black American Expo taking place in Dallas next month on May 29th. Live gatherings are crucially important because that's the purest example of online advocacy translating into offline action. It raises morale by confirming that you are not alone. Behind each and every one of those screen names you see are real black people, and you know they're real because when the call went out, they showed up. But the only way that works is if you are engaged and stay engaged at a high level. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit the like button because it does help raise the profile of these channels. If something your favorite new black media personality says strikes a chord with you, go ahead and put something on their books. Your donations constitute a form of material encouragement. Never underestimate the value of your involvement. We must cultivate and nurture that core culture of not taking one another for granted. You want to know the key thing that makes us different than the rest of the global black diaspora? We don't take each other for granted. Sure, we may not be totally consistent about it, sure, but at least we do it. Pretty much the main reason why you got all of these black folks from around the world who come here, and not the other way around, is because outside of our group, the practice is to take advantage of one another, to disregard anything outside of one's particular tribe or ethnic group. And this undermines and ultimately destroys the essential loyalty that a group requires simply to be functional. We have come out of a common experience, and by connecting with one another and continuing to stay connected to one another, we give meaning and value to that experience. We reaffirm and reinforce that we are a people. Nobody can or should do that for us. If there's one sad part of our story, it's that in too many cases, the very people who attack and take advantage of us are able to see the power we have better than we do. That's why New Black Media exists, as a mirror that we can hold up so we can see ourselves clearly. We in the Black Grassroots have been out here a decade and a half online, and we're going to keep being out here because the work must be done. The bonds between us have been weakened by malicious anti-black forces from without and by opportunists from within, but those bonds have not been destroyed. Yes, it will take plenty of work to repair the chains that link us to our past and to one another, and some of those weak links will have to be discarded. I'm fine with that. Power is not inclusive, power is exclusive. We're going to do what should have been done 150 years ago. Show all these Negroes who aren't taking us anywhere the door. We are not a big tent. We are an exclusive club, and you need to get comfortable about that concept. We are shunned and attacked and maligned and degraded by all the world. So be it. The reason we are hated by all the world is because we make all the world feel insecure about themselves. They try to conceal their jealousy and their envy of what we've done and what we've come to mean to the world behind insults and denigration because what we did was a singular accomplishment. The most oppressed people on the planet changed the most powerful nation on the planet. We stood our ground. These other groups have far more resources and liberties than we ever had, and yet they fled and continue to flee. And that reality eats at them, because they look at us and they see people who didn't just stand, but who came to define the land that they're being oppressed in. Typically, it's the ruling class who defines the nation, but in our case, it was the oppressed. The people who attack us have to use our words, the philosophical and cultural terminology that we created, because we gave birth to an entirely different way for people to see themselves, not through the eyes of the oppressor, but through their own eyes. This didn't exist before we created it. From the slave fields to the battlefields, and next to the boardrooms. We're on the right track, but we have to stay the course. You have to stay the course. You deserve and you ought to have a media that talks about the world as you know it to be. You should never have to roll your eyes because the person talking is so far off base you can't believe it. You should never have someone who is presented as speaking for you doing everything they can to shoehorn everybody else into the conversation. Listening to a so-called black commentator should never be an exercise in frustration. White media is all about bias confirmation. They don't actually offer any news programs. The stuff that they call news is just another TV show, no different than the latest episode of CSI or Law and Order. It's written, scripted, and every aspect of it measured and evaluated so that it will appeal to a specific audience. It's a media product, and they tailor it so that it will entice the largest segment of a particular viewership. Problem is that viewership is one that's largely antagonistic to our interests. So when they bring on a black person, that black person's job is to agree with whatever the white commentators say. Just a few years ago, the white media had on the occasional once-in-a-blue-moon black person who said things counter to the white media station narrative. They thought they could afford to. But now we see there's absolutely nobody who the white media puts on who will say anything counter to their narrative. Don Lemonade thought that he was the belle of the ball, but he misunderstood how precarious his white media paymaster's position is now, and how stringently they want things to be held tight. And all it took was for him to have one momentary act of disobedience, and they canned him without so much as a by your leave. What's changed? You have. These Negro bootlicks can get put on the air, but all they're good for is bias confirmation. But that's not why these white media companies have them on. They're put on as a way to get you and me to follow them and the narrative that they agree with. That's why you hear the white media saying so often, it's important that people look on TV and see themselves. That's what's meant to be brainwashing. You see somebody who looks like you, but every time they open their mouth, they say nothing that you say. And about the time that the uprisings began 7 or so years ago, that's when the white media began to realize that those black man on the street segments that they used to be able to do were now backfiring big time. Because too many black people, especially the young, were now saying things that directly attacked the white media narrative, and they were doing it consistently. Clearly, somebody was gaming these young people up, and they could figure out who it was. So the white media retreated back to the safe confines of their network studios, and the only black people who they would have on are now the usual suspects, lifelong bootlicks who know that their job is to reinforce whatever the white media wants them to say. Pathetic yes men. These are the black panelists now. You're the one who made that happen. You're the one who ran them up off the block. You should never have someone who holds back or waters down the message. You should never tolerate somebody whose message is intolerable. Everybody else has liars pushing propaganda. You deserve to have honest advocates pushing the truth. For 500 years, they've poured lies into our ears. Now we're going to ram the truth down their throats. I am honored, I am humbled, I am blessed to have you still here after all these years. Part of that is because the fight's not over. I get that. But even if white supremacy never existed, we would still need voices that speak to us being the strongest, most capable and disciplined version of ourselves. And make no mistake, white supremacy will fall. Every evil system does. There's no exceptions. Sure, white supremacy is adaptive, which is its greatest strength. It tries to adapt to the changes in society, mostly by claiming that it's being different now when only the words have changed and maybe the use of 1 or 2 front Negroes. White supremacy will go the way of every other evil system. Now, when will this occur? I don't know. But what I do know is that we don't want to go down with it. This will require us to get back to those core principles of depending on other black people for what we need. We used to do that. You go ahead and you look at these black neighborhoods, you talk to some of these graybeards, I'm talking about the World War II generation, and one of the things you'll find is a lot of those neighborhoods were not just built by black people, they were serviced by black people. We used to go to black people for everything. Dr. Claude Anderson talked about that. We had entire bus lines. Everybody from the mason to the plumber to your child's piano teacher were black. Then we decided that we wanted to integrate, which mostly meant that we wanted to have everything we need come from non-black people. That's because we have a core insecurity, some of us, that we haven't overcome. That's part of the reason why the new black media exists, to remind you of who and what we truly are. That means resources and institutions that are going to ensure that we are fully able to provide for ourselves. But most of all, it will mean relearning how to look in the mirror and love what we see. White supremacy has dealt a grievous blow to our basic confidence, and it is that confidence that we are in the process of reestablishing now. First, we get black people reacclimated to being able to have confidence in what they hear other black people say, to know that the information they're getting from other black people is not just trustworthy, it's ahead of the curve. From there, you get other black people to have confidence in what they do for themselves. And finally, what starts at home spreads abroad. We have confidence in one another. The entire purpose of news is not supposed to be propaganda. It's supposed to be to keep the people informed. Information is crucial so that people can remain free. A population who knows what's going on is a population that is hard to control, a population that can intelligently act in their own interests. White supremacy has confiscated the wealth and maldistributed it along lines of race. At this point, the goal for white supremacy is to use propaganda masquerading as news in order to keep a critical mass of the population classified as white on board with the status quo. With the white media, the masses never get accurate information. Under white supremacy, accuracy is the enemy of control. Well, you need accurate information, given to you by people who you know are operating in your interests. Absolutely nobody has the power to make me say anything that I don't believe. Nobody has the power to make me put any agenda ahead of a black empowerment agenda. Nobody has the power to make me bite my tongue or look over my shoulder because I'm terrified that speaking up for my people might cost me my job at MSNBC or CNN. Though let's be honest, these bootlicks you see on cable, they don't care what happens to black people. The reason that they don't speak up for black folks isn't because they're intimidated by their white paymasters so much as they don't care about black people. Don Lemon had seen the writing on the wall for a while now. He knew when they took his little old nighttime show from him that it was just a matter of time before he was eventually edged out. Well, we don't need mouthpieces who only speak up for black folks when they have no other choice, or when they decide that they're in a tiff, or when they figure that the butter biscuits are about to run out. We don't need anyone who only speaks in black people's interests after they've tried everything else. So you make sure you be here every weekday morning to get your moment of truth, and every Sunday when all the heavy hitters of black empowerment weigh in on the issues of the day. Not until now did you have the ability to hear from a number of people delivering an on-code message, a message based on intelligence, foresight, but most of all, based on what is in our people's interests. I'm amazed that I'm alive at this pivotal moment, and I think it's for a reason, which is why you see me doing as much as I can. I am humbled that you've allowed me to be part of this moment. Without you, there would be no Professor Black Truth. I'd just be some guy slamming my gums online, videos that nobody watches, and then if I disappeared, nobody would care. There's been plenty of those, by the way. Make no mistake, you're not here because I am. There's a lot of black folks who try to gather an audience mostly talking about pop culture music, the lowest common denominator of discourse. We don't do that here. The reason I'm here is because you are, and I never lose sight of that. And don't let the fact that we don't have millions of people here fool you. Look at all the slave rebellions and slave uprisings that have taken place from the 17th century to 2020. Was it the millions of black people who were involved in it? No, because it never is. The fulcrum of history has never tilted based on the masses. Most people just go along with the status quo. It has always been a dedicated handful who have changed things. See, it's because we're just getting our legs back under us again to start looking in the direction of exercising power. We need to get used to how power actually works. That's why we have a somewhat skewed view of it. We think that power is solely about numbers. Yes, the quantity of your numbers matter, but the quality of those numbers matter a hell of a lot more. The most important thing the new voices of black media can do is to continue to bang the drum, push the message. The most important thing you can do is to continue to listen. Continue to be the force multiplier by spreading the word that there's a place black people can come to hear the truth. Yes, we have a long way to go, but at least now we've finally started the journey. So I salute the family for being here and making this discourse into what it is. The bootlicks, like the ones on FM radio, were forced to change their message so that they could fit what we've been saying. Thanks to you, we haven't had to change one letter of what we've said. That's the power of being on code, and it didn't take millions of us to do it, though it does take a critical mass. I thank you for the work that you've put in. Without you, we don't exist. And I also salute the new voices of black media themselves. Jason Black, Brother Tariq, Tarian Rain, Your World, aka Mr. Harvey, Lisa Cabrera, Chris Miller, Vicky Dillard, Phil Scott, Nicole's View. I know that there's many others I could name. Please feel free to shout yourself out in the comments. It is wonderful to see what this has become in 15 years. The mission was to take control of the discourse in the black community and to elevate the debate. And that is what we've done. And we're only just getting started. Yes, it took time, but as Dr. John Henrik Clarke explained, revolutions and revolts on average take between 10 and 20 years to gain steam. And for us, that's more difficult because we're in the belly of the beast, under hyper-surveillance, deprived of resources. And yet, we, this determined few, have made our presence felt. That's what it means to be who we are. That's what it means to be the new black media. Good evening, and be one.